Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now from apparently his basement, Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the States Project at Future Now. Aaron, I get the sense that you are welcome back to the program, of course.
Thank you.
I get the sense that you have been like in wherever you are right now for like months. Have you seen outside of like the daylight that's streaming through that picture right there behind you?
Oh, it's so
a beautiful
nice
day
outside.
here on the shores of the Gowanus. It's a beautiful day.
There you are.
Just a few little red clouds here.
Yep.
But you know, we've been very busy here trying to figure out what's going on in this election. And you guys might not believe it, but it's actually very close out there.
The election. And my understanding is that the election is close. Yes, between Harris and Donald Trump.
You only hear that every second on cable news because it's usually them trying to get you to tune into something next. But it is close as well.
Well, let's talk about some of the other elections on the ballot here, where it's also very close. Now, are you guys familiar with the Washington top 2 primary, for example?
No.
So every August, Washington has a primary election where the top 2 vote getters from every primary advance regardless of party. And every voter in the state gets a ballot mailed to them and they can mail it back in. And they have like 60% turnout or something. And so it ends up actually being very predictive of what happens in November. And the results from this August's Washington all-party primary, and it ends up being very predictive, not necessarily of the presidential election, though certainly there's a correlation there, but really of kind of the ballot as a whole. And what it's showing is that Washington looks like it may be a little more Democratic than it was in 2020, which is a good sign because, hopefully it moves in line with the rest of the nation. 2022 results, however, showed that Washington was maybe getting more Democratic than a lot of places that shifted red, but also in 2022, the Midwest blue wall states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin all shifted blue a little bit. And they have a lot of areas that resemble Washington state politically. If you think about kind of rural Washington state and rural Wisconsin, a lot of similarities. And so that ends up being very predictive. And so we're kind of hoping that it'll be, something like it'll probably be close, but we're hoping that especially in some of those blue wall states, we can hopefully lock in some gains at the state level. Whereas, in the Sunbelt where you saw a little more backsliding in 2022, either we can kind of get back to, 2020 results or, maybe even exceed them. So, but again, we're
what do you think
tune out the polls, but if you look at kind of the data on the ground from that, for example, it's just a very close race. And we're trying to get out there the message that, our candidates really support you and your situation. So, yeah.
So Washington State, if I understand you, Washington State is somewhat predictive of how this top 2 candidates election is somewhat predictive of how Democratic turnout and enthusiasm is trending in some of the more Rust Belt states, the ones that are sort of like latitudinally, I guess.
Yeah.
What accounts for like the Sunbelt states sort of backsliding a little bit? And is it a function of like, was there COVID migration?
I don't think it's that necessarily. I think the Sunbelt 2022 backsliding a little bit came from, I think, partially just the lower propensity voters there maybe are a little more Democratic. But also, if you look at Arizona, for example, it was a good year overall in 2022 in Arizona, but we didn't flip the state legislature. And part of the reason why was that Republicans actually turned out at a higher rate in Arizona in 2022 than in 2020. But it's just that or relative to Democrats than 2020, but there were so many just extreme right-wing candidates like Blake Masters and Carrie Lake that independent voters and some Republicans ended up voting for Democrats in those high-profile races. The issue is that the state legislature is still run by Republicans, still passing all these insane laws. They almost had the territorial abortion ban stand there, for example. And it's because the voters there didn't really understand that on the ballot you have Republicans running for state office that are just as extreme as the ones that you see at the statewide level. So you have, plenty of Carrie Lakes running for state legislature, but you need to get resources to those candidates to let people know, hey, this person, Cory McGar, Rachel Jones is actually just as extreme as this person, maybe even more so. They think January 6th was a false flag. They want to ban all abortion. They don't believe in global warming. They believe in polluting your water. They believe in giving our state's water to the Saudis. And so, again, it's really important that, state candidates can get the message out just how extreme these far-right candidates are.
Well, so is abortion not having the salience that people thought in the Sunbelt in terms of how the polling is shaking out, both in Nevada and in Arizona?
Well, in Arizona, they actually have on the ballot a referendum to enshrine it. But also, if it is enshrined in the state constitution, then voters may think, oh, it's, I can vote Republican for other stuff because they won't be able to touch it if it's in the state constitution. So you need to let them know, it's not just abortion. Obviously it is a very important driving issue. And in states like, for example, Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, where, there have been legislative efforts to curtail it, it still can be a very animating issue. But you have to, it can't just be that. And if you look at kind of polling as a whole, again, don't fixate on just one poll, but if you look at polling as a whole, it seems like voters by and large like Democrats more, but they don't necessarily trust them more on economic issues. And the next 6 weeks will be really critical for trying to get them to trust everywhere on the ballot on those pocketbook issues. Because, again, if you look at what we were able to achieve in 2022 after flipping Michigan and Minnesota, you look at kind of not just protecting abortion rights, but it was also, providing more benefits for, people, low income and seniors. It was, having these huge climate bills that are going to allow a lot more climate production, not just like protecting the environment, but also providing good jobs in those states for, clean energy projects. You look at providing free school lunches and leave, which, by the way, can really help someone in a tight spot financially. All of these things where, we're looking out for you, voters need to hear about that. And they need to understand the power of, if you elect a Democratic state legislature, they can really deliver for you and make it so that, you're in a more comfortable position, financially, not just though. And again, abortion also is, in many ways, I think sometimes when we think about, is it, a pocketbook issue, so to speak? I think for a lot of people, abortion is, because pocketbook can also be shorthand for something that is going to affect me shortly, as opposed to something that's kind of like more ideological out in the ether. And so for a lot of voters, abortion is, belongs in the bucket of things that we normally call a pocketbook, just because it's something that can be very relevant to your life very quickly.
How much is Tim Walz, if you have a sense of this, maybe you don't, going out there and touting his record in Minnesota? Because this is a perfect example. Minnesota, one vote, I should say one Senate seat, was it, or a House seat?
One Senate seat. One
Senate seat in Minnesota basically opens the floodgates to free lunch and to paid leave, like you say, and like a whole host of very material benefits, of progressive material benefits. At the same time, you've got Harris not necessarily going out there and touting this range of stuff. Doesn't seem to want to doesn't seem to want to emphasize policy at all in the context of this race. I personally think, as an electoral matter, that might be a positive. In the years past, certainly Republicans have not been running on policy per se, other than don't like trans people, don't like gay people, don't like immigrants. I don't know if that's policy per se, but how much latitude does Tim Walz have to go into Arizona, to go into North Carolina, say Nevada, and say, look, one vote can make all the difference in the world. Look what we did in Minnesota.
Yeah, and so when it comes to kind of talking about issues, I think, again, voters can only hold so many things in their minds at once. And so, campaigns pick and choose what they're trying to emphasize. And I think, especially at the state level, we're really trying to, get candidates to emphasize, voting for these candidates at the state level is going to deliver, those things that you just mentioned about Tim Walz's record. And so I think, certainly having him out there is an example of what a state government can do to make, a state a better place to live. Because, I mean, if you look at Minnesota, it's not just, you can rattle off all the stats you want about, the policies he's passed, but Minnesota just, it's becoming a better place to live. It's got, better schools for your kids. Easier to get ready for them in the morning because you don't have to make a lunch. Just cleaner air, cleaner water that you breathe and drink. It's a good vibe in Minnesota, and you can get good vibes in your place.
How much that free lunch is?
It's not just an economic issue.
It's not just an economic issue. It is a big difference.
It is a quality of life issue. Again, that goes like abortion is a quality of life issue. And so I think if you're running on quality of life issues, that's how you win. And so, that's kind of what these candidates need to do. And by the way, the Harris-Walz campaign, they've raised more than $500 million since she became the de facto nominee. If you look at a state like, for example, Wisconsin, right next to Minnesota, which is trying to get on Minnesota's level because they have fair maps for the first time in decades. The candidates there, they are going to need to raise like a 1/10 of a percentage point of what she's just raised in the past 2 months to close their budget gaps. And that's why we are here at the States Project to try to help them do that.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.